happy moment where I can start inviting to the stage top experts in the field. So I'm very pleased to open the discussion, the following discussion, with our distinguished panelists. And first, I would like to invite here Carlien Scheele, Director of the European Institute for Gender Equality.
Is it at the end?
Yeah. Secondly, we have the honor to have a member of Parliament of Estonia, e-Estonia support group, Hanimägi. Third, I am very happy to have here Tokhadze. She is a seconded official from the Council of Europe, Director General Human Rights and Rule of Law, DigitalEurope. And finally, Henrik Trasberg, who has been part of our project for a very long time, but now representing European Commission DG Connect. Now, once again, very warm welcome to all of you. And I have to admit, I have to start with this little backstory. When I was preparing for this panel, I felt a little bit lost myself. I felt lost because I had this image in my head that there is this vast infrastructure. Let's imagine this as a highway system being built, and at the same time there are people moving and using this in a very fast speeds. And then I was like, okay, so from which angle this discussion should take place? Because there are so many aspects to any type of infrastructure that we are building. We can ask ourselves, will it work for women and men the same way? What about people who have disability or a special need? What about older people, and so on and so forth? So I'm really happy that this panel discussion tonight brings these very different perspectives together here. And I would like to start with something that, in a way, is a foundation to many things in life and should be in policies, a gender equality perspective. So, Carlien, you are the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality. And I would like to know if automated decision-making systems are often described as neutral and objectives. From gender equality perspective, where do you see the most significant structural risks in the use of these systems in public services today?
Thank you, Christian, for this question. And I realize that in this conference on AI, I'm here with a bunch of paper. But you know, I always get a little bit uneasy when people assure me that their systems are, let's say, gender neutral. And in fact, what they often mean is equality is assured. Yeah, and we know from experience that this is not the case. So maybe I can start off with, it all starts, of course, with those who design those systems. And we know from our research that despite the fact that it's a growing sector, that there's new jobs in the AI sector, only 26% of the positions are held by women. So basically, it also shows that whose assumptions, whose experiences, and life courses are reflected in this technology. So that's the first thing I would like to mark here. And we could only say that these systems are neutral and objectives if there were no structural gender inequalities in society, but that's not the case. I don't need to tell you this because we all know this. More concretely, it means that historical data fed into these systems reflects unequal access to work, education, income, and care responsibilities. So when these systems are used, for example, for recruitment, social services, education, access to training, they can, let's say, disadvantage women proportionally. And I can give you a nice example from my own working experience, and I'm now going back to the 90s, really. So this is not a new phenomena. But I worked in employment services, and at one point, the Minister for Social Affairs decided to focus policies on women, as we called at that time, from ethnic minorities. So he wanted them to be trained, to get specific attention, easier access to the labor market. And at one point, we decided to assess, let's say, the training budget that was spent countrywide. And you know where the money went? To the training of white men, if I can say so. Mm. And then I approached people working in these employment bureaus, and I said, why is this? And they said, well, basically, you know, what we indicated in the system is that, of course, we want value for money. So if people are being trained, we need them fully on the labor market. And we know it's mostly men who can do this, yeah? And so for me, this was the first time, and I'm talking now about 1993, yeah, long time ago, that I realized something goes completely wrong. So if you automate this in the systems and you use the wrong assumptions and discriminatory thoughts, this is actually what is happening. And maybe to say that what we see as a very big risk at EIGE, and it's not only in this area, but in many other areas, is that these systems, they make structural inequality appear objective. Yeah? I'm sure if you ask the average person working in this sector, do you create equality? I mean, is there equal treatment in your systems? They won't even understand the question. Maybe I can leave it to that for the moment, but yeah, so the...
Yeah, thank you, Carlien.
Not neutral at all.
Yeah, I think throughout today and tomorrow we will hear from also the people that are developing these systems. But if these risks that you mentioned are structural rather than sort of exceptional, they really raise the important questions for policy and governance. And Henrik, I will turn now to you because you have the experience from Estonia and now representing the European Commission. So before we really take this deep dive into what's the current state in AI governance, especially after the some say controversial digital omnibus proposal was published. Can you, for those who are not really familiar with what the digital omnibus means, can you summarize it for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think why we are talking about digital omnibus, which is one of the regulatory proposals from the Commission and now discussed by the co-legislators, why this is I think you're bringing this to the table here is because it's an interesting example of where we have a regulatory framework that is meant to protect fundamental rights through kind of different angles. And then there is a proposal to go and simplify some of those rules in those regulations, which then begs the question of, okay, there is of course a reason why we're doing it. There is a reason for competitiveness and to ensure innovation in Europe, etc. But of course, the critique and the controversy that you also referred to then comes from the fact that in this process of simplifying our rules that are meant to protect fundamental rights, are we undermining, so when we're trying to protect our competitiveness and innovation, are we going to undermine the original goal of the rules that we had? And so the digital omnibus proposal, what it does is that it looks at a couple of digital regulation, the AI Act, the GDPR, some of the data regulations, such as the Data Act, Data Governance Act, and also cybersecurity regulations, and then proposes concrete interventions into those regulations. And so, for example, in AI Act, it really looks at how could we ensure that our compliance is more effective, that it's more easier for organization to adhere to those rules. In the GDPR context, it tries to harmonize some of the interpretations and some of the concepts, which can be a bit controversial. So it tries to do all of those things. And now, indeed, the question is that is it going too far? Is it not going far enough? And I guess as we delve into discussion, I can go a bit more into how different kind of sides see this issue.
But maybe I won't let you off the hook just now. I have one more question related to that. You mentioned already that there are some stakeholders who are opposing or voicing quite loudly their concerns about the omnibus. So, what has really the Commission done in order to address these concerns, and is equality perspective also a concern in there?
Certainly, it still remains that the policy objective to protect the rights of people. So I think when the digital omnibus proposals were made, the idea was always to only target this kind of very specific, narrow issues that can be solved without undermining fundamental rights. That was the goal, very clearly. The question is, does it in some cases go too far? I think there is still a legislative process ongoing to actually discuss that. Anyway, this is a proposal that came out, and now there is this kind of iterative legislative process there. So the member states and the European Parliament are making their proposals, and of course specific issues can be addressed. So to bring an example, there were a lot of civil society organizations that were very critical of one amendment in the AI Act, which was that there are today an obligation to register certain AI systems which are not high risk because they fall under an exemption, because there is, for example, they are used for preparatory tasks. And for those, registration obligation was removed in the proposal. Civil societies very strongly felt that this undermines possibility for market surveillance authorities to actually understand what's going on and understand what was the logic when different organizations kind of decided that they are exempt from the rules. And so this obligation has been critiqued, and I can imagine, or at least right now, it certainly seems that in this kind of a legislative process, it's quite likely might be reintroduced, and so these questions can be addressed still.
Now, coming to the national level, and Carlien mentioned already one example from the early 1990s in the Netherlands. So Andre Hanimägi, Estonia is often presented as a success story of digital governance. At least we like to boast about it. We say that our governance is now 100% digital. How does this narrative, in your view, hold up when we haven't properly assessed the risks of automated systems that potentially create unequal outcomes or cause harm?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Christian, to you and your team, thank you for organizing this event. And I hope that everyone here also can enjoy the snowy fairy tale that is Tallinn. So enjoy that as well, not only this conference. But you're asking me to criticize a bit our digital...
You're a parliament member, eh?
Yeah, our digital advances to our foreign friends. I cannot do it. So I'm going to tell this the other way around. You know, for a small country, of course, efficiency and speed and convenience is very important, especially when we have low resources that Estonia has. So we have to be very efficient. I think in that case, we have done a very good job. However, this narrative that you told us is not wrong, but I think it is not complete. So when we talk about these aspects that I just mentioned, equality and inequality are being left behind. And this is the problem, which you already said, and sadly also the AI that you talked with also said that. So probably we don't need any more panelists, because the AI talks the same thing. But we see that all these systems that we have built, and sadly probably today still are building, we do not completely understand these issues that we are talking right now. And we have to realize that, of course, these systems do not operate in a vacuum. The systems operate in a society that is already unequal. There are so many things that make us human, and that the AI which somebody builds cannot comprehend all these questions, all these nuances. So I think if you ask if our narrative is right, I think it is, but it is not complete.
Maybe just to sort of complement or one idea that came to my mind, what I'm struggling with quite often. In my role as the Equality Commissioner, one of my tasks is to monitor how the government is upholding their duties for mainstreaming equality, gender equality, into different law proposals. And my experience has shown over these years that I've been in this position that unfortunately it's very weak across the areas. So it's not just in the digital area, but across the different policy areas. And sometimes also throughout this Equitech project that this conference is part of, I also realized that the sort of different groups or different backgrounds that people have, they tend to speak also with different vocabularies. And I'm actually very happy that it has given me this opportunity to really learn this other vocabulary as well.
You know, I'm just going to say that maybe today we are mostly still talking about AI literacy. Mm-hmm. You know, when we talk about new systems, we talk about how this will affect the elderly who are not so AI literate, and the discussion mostly ends there. The legislators, which I am also, are not very educated about this, how to ask the right questions, how to ask the developer the right questions, how to ask the state the right questions, and I'm quite sure that we have not yet there how to ask those right questions.
But these questions really ultimately touch on the limits of efficiency and the obligations of democratic states. And I'm very happy Council of Europe is here represented. So from a human rights and rule of law perspective, are there decisions or public services that should not be automated? We included that question to the generative AI model earlier, but what about from your perspective? Even if these services could be technically feasible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that question. I would say the technical feasibility does not stand for or substitute the conformity for the benchmarks of human rights, democracy and rule of law. I would like to also contribute to already very meaningful and insightful conversation from the perspective of the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on AI and Human Rights, Rule of Law, Democracy and the Rule of Law, which happens to be the first ever international legally binding treaty, ensuring the human-centric approach, human-into-loop approach, and also preventing the adverse impacts from the perspective of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. The preamble, indeed, of the Framework Convention indeed highlights and emphasizes the benefic opportunities created by the AI, such as optimization of the public resources, sustainable development, equal treatment, gender equity. and equality. However, we should be considerate about the adverse impacts that and societal implications that can be caused due to the regulatory divergence and also the rapid development of the technology. The Framework Convention does not prescribe sort of a blacklist of the prohibition of prohibited automation of specific decisions or public services. As the Framework Treaty, it defines the general broader commitment and the overarching governance system of the AI technologies, and therefore it prescribes and rests on the general obligations to protect human rights, ensure integrity for democratic processes and respect for the rule of law. As well, it ensures and establishes general principles related to the activities within the scope of life cycle of AI systems, such as human dignity and autonomy, accountability, responsibility, transparency. I'm pretty much sure we'll have an opportunity to touch upon. And therefore, the general outline and logic of the Framework Convention is that the private as well as public sector actors should comply with these benchmarks set by the Framework Convention. But indeed, full automation could contradict actually and challenge these principles. Let's say in a very sensitive sectors such as law enforcement or the deployment of AI systems for the purposes of security. Such AI-powered tools which are deployed and used, and these kind of sectors could amplify the scope, speed, and scale of adverse impacts such as surveillance, mass processing of sensitive categories of personal data, bulk interceptions, so on and so forth. And therefore, I would say that the main idea of the Framework Convention is to provide the overarching the general guidance according to which the state parties are obliged to ensure measures, administrative, legislative measures for developing and creating a responsible environment for the innovation. I'm going to stop there, and I'm pretty much sure we shall be able to continue that.
Yeah, thank you so much, because it's you want to say something very quickly. Okay, and then I have like a follow-up question to basically all of you. What do you think?
I just want to say, I think it's quite interesting that if you look at how the AI policy has developed in Europe, both in Council of Europe and European Union, we don't actually really prohibit many use cases. It's mostly about kind of creating this risk management mechanism and like conformity assessment to make sure that we understand and deal with the risks, and there is like transparency and human oversights, etc. But it's an interesting choice by the legislator so far that we haven't really too much gone into the prohibition area, which of course there are some prohibitions, but that's not kind of the general logic of how we regulate so far, which is quite, I think, an interesting development.
Yeah, because overall, I mean, today, tomorrow, a lot of talk will be around governance as well, and who is in the end responsible if something goes wrong. And I think one of the questions that kind of has been puzzling me for quite some time now, especially when following the news as well, is that at times it starts to feel like, are we still governed by laws and acts, or are there new players like tech giants that actually have enormous power over how we live and how everything gets framed? So in your sort of view, how do you see that I would say a challenge that we are facing right now, and can the responsibility for human rights impacts ever be fully outsourced to technology providers? Whoever is would like to start with this.
Well, I would say Indeed, from the perspective of the Framework Convention, the anchoring principle here is the principle of accountability and responsibility, according to which the respective actors, AI actors, are to be answerable to those adverse impacts that have been created by the AI systems, corresponding to and in conformity with the domestic national legislations and also the international human rights frameworks. The principle of accountability and responsibility is very much intertwined with the transparency and traceability, considering the fact that the responsible actor should be detectable. And also it is also pretty much connected to the state's obligation, according to the Framework Convention, to develop or maintain administrative or legislative measures in order to provide procedural safeguards and effective remedies. That, from my perspective, and in speaking of the private sector representatives, I would say this also is intertwined with the corporate social responsibility and human rights diligence. But at the end of the day, the deployer, the sector representative, should it be a private sector or a public authority, which decides to deploy an AI system or depend on the outputs, depend its decisions on the outputs generated by AI systems, they carry the liability. And accordingly, even though the function delegation may sound quite appealing, the legal responsibility should not be transferred to the third parties, even in those cases when the AI system is provided by the third-party actors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that leads me actually, so what is happening in a way in people's lives? So Carlien, when in your work you see, you work also with gender-based violence, right? Gender-based violence issues. And I think in your work you see that how AI facilitated gender-based violence, or these generative models that we've heard recently as well, how quickly they have been used for perpetuating violence against women. So my question really is that if we think around the AI development and which groups of women beyond, if we talk about gender-based violence, are most likely to be disadvantaged by the systems built around sort of standard life courses?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe, thanks, Christian. Maybe to first touch upon your first question, where you linked it specifically to gender-based violence. For the Cypriot presidency, we will soon launch a report on cyber violence against girls, young women. And the interesting thing is, this time, we also interviewed young boys, young girls, to better understand what is happening. I can't report yet because the report is still not launched, but to be honest, and yes, I'm a bit older age, so I don't follow closely what is happening in the digital world, but the stories we heard are incredible. But I won't touch upon that too much now, because your question was more about which groups of women are most likely more disadvantaged by systems built around standard life courses. Well, you know, if these systems are built on the assumption that everyone lives an uninterrupted life or an uninterrupted career, yeah, that's not the case. I mean, that's superficial. And if that's basically the standard, something goes completely wrong with these automated decision-making systems. Because we know that many people don't live uninterrupted lives, especially women. So those who are particularly disadvantaged by these systems are women with care responsibilities and career breaks. And we know from our research that the big burden of care still, despite the modern society, lies with women. The big burden of care. Nothing is basically changing there, at least not rapidly. Then we know that another group that is disadvantaged is women in lower skilled and precarious employment. Also because they have fewer reskilling opportunities. Women re-entering the labor market later in life after an interruption in their career. And then we know that 3 factors are also very relevant: socioeconomic background, migrant status, and age. And Birute mentioned very briefly, but she didn't elaborate on that example, but she mentioned the Netherlands. And I don't know if you know this example, because it was actually quite a big scandal, and it's still a big scandal. And I want to briefly mention it here, because many women, single mothers, were impacted by this system. But at one point, the Dutch government designed this automated system to basically support families with childcare support. But not only to support them, but also to detect fraud. Yeah? And what was built in that system was the assumption that women or people with a migrant background, they were more prone to commit fraud. Yeah? They also introduced certain postal codes, certain socio-economic, let's say, backgrounds of people or certain areas. And without any doubt, a few other factors. But you can imagine what happened. It was awful when it came out, how certain people were impacted by this, falsely accused of fraud. I think it came out maybe 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and we are still in the state of trying to repair the damage done. Children were taken away from single mothers, for example, yeah, because these mothers were falsely accused from fraud. So this is what these systems do. And just to say, because you asked me specifically about women, disadvantaged groups of women, but don't let us fool ourselves, because these systems can impact everyone. Because there's a lack of oversight and there's basically no accountability. And that's the fear. And I mean, we have a lot of research that you can look at, but as long as these systems are gender blind, and it's not only with these systems, but also with policies, but if no impact assessment is done at an early stage to see what is the impact on women and men, different groups in society, it's very scary. Thank you.
Yes, I have to admit that I've started to feel a little bit at unease, because it tends to be that whenever we are at a conference or at a meeting on AI and equality, we always talk about the Dutch example. So I always feel that we need to probably find some other examples as well, because I'm sure there are several more. But I would, Andre, like now to come back to Estonia and the services, sort of the public services that are being automated more and more. And you know very well that recently, for example, in Estonia, there has been the development where the legal service that had been available for victims of crime, that was decided that it will be fully automated and replaced with a chatbot instead. So now I want to ask you, how, in your view, what's the future? How is this development that we want to be more efficient as a state, and I realize we need to be in many ways. How does it also change still the way that people interact with the state daily? What are the dangers there? Because I can see them around many corners are just coming towards us.
Yeah, first of all, I have been very critical about this decision to basically put an AI bot instead of a real lawyer. For clarification, these were the lawyers who were provided to people who were low income, or they had abusive relationships, or they had many issues that are very personal, very emotional, very hard. So you can imagine that if you speak to a real person, who knows your emotional state. He sees you. It's completely different than talking to an AI bot. Whether it's great or not great, whether it has amazing AI capabilities in law, it's still not the human touch those people in need need. So I think this is the basic or the most talked about problem, that the state disappears from your eyes. You don't really know anymore who is making those decisions, why are those decisions are being made, and how can I contest these decisions. And this is basically the most important thing the state has to do. You know, you cannot delegate human rights, or you cannot outsource these things. The state has to be always responsible. You know, in Estonia we say, töö on tellija materjalist. In English, basically, it is the work that it has been done. It is from the materials they are given. So the state has been a bit too away from these problems. So I think this is the most important problem. And if we talk about more about these examples that are being made, then, you know, in Estonia there's a great discussion now about an AI board that was made by the Prime Minister. You know, this board basically is for to give advice to the Prime Minister and to give advice to the government how to be more AI efficient, how to use AI in governance and so on. And it's a very good idea. But the AI board is consists of very hardworking, very good, very smart men. And of course they know AI, they know they are very good entrepreneurs. I don't say anything about that. But as we already discussed, if we are going to give advice on how the systems should be built and how the citizens who are very different, are the citizens going to use those systems? And the citizens are very different. So is it really okay that those who develop those systems are only men? So this is one of the problems.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and I also thought about it like from the perspective that when we see that sort of the use of AI in the governance, more and more use of that, it has a societal impacts. So how come is it that the council of AI only sort of is composed of from a business and AI kind of oriented people. So where are really people who look at from the sort of society or?
Yeah, the user's perspective is I think the most neglected problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think trustworthiness is the good kind of the term to use. That there is no kind of trustworthy component in the discussion. Perhaps.
Yes, and that's exactly what I want to ask you now, Henrik. The title of this conference implies that we can build fair and trustworthy AI. Do you think we are on the right path with this, or which way should we be more mindful of?
I think it depends. So there are very many facets to it. In the context of getting to a point where when a company develops an AI system, that they think through questions of bias, they think through different kinds of impacts and harms that the system can have, that they think through transparency and human oversight. I think for that we have right now already good processes to have more and more of this trustworthiness in the system development and when those systems are then deployed in the service. Of course, right now it's still kind of in a very early stage of maturity of how to do this, but there is a kind of ongoing standardization process and various different processes that might imply that as we kind of move slowly now into the future of having a lot of AI components or automated decision-making components in our like core infrastructure and in our core decision-making processes, I think that there is a good trend, and I can see that there is a good potential that this is at least a solvable issue. What I perhaps am more worried about is that there is no good way to govern this kind of broad societal impacts that emerge. So, for example, how AI impacts skills of people or the whole de-skilling process, how AI is going to impact the next generation, the youth that kind of grow up with daily using AI systems, how AI is impacting the asymmetries that exist, for example, between an employer and an employee, that where you have somebody who is in a stronger position is suddenly, being able to automate people and use AI instead, or companies that have more and more data, big tech. There is this asymmetries that become stronger and stronger with AI uptake, and I think for those kind of socioeconomic risks, it's much more to tackle, much more difficult to tackle them. We don't have very good governance mechanisms, and I think social media is a good example where we have a bunch of rules on how to address kind of specific, let's say, problematic content that gets posted on social media, but we really struggle to address how social media impacts, for example, mental health. And there, I think I see the main concern.
Yeah, coming to Council of Europe now, and what you just heard from Henrik as well, I would like to maybe, if you could elaborate a little bit more, that what's from your perspective, how do you, in practical terms, states or governments could address sort of structural and indirect discrimination, including gender discrimination that Carlien earlier brought up in these either AI in a wider sense or in the automated decision-making systems, if we be more specific?
Indeed. Well, the decisions based on AI systems outputs, they may be resulting into the discriminatory outcomes and practices, considering that the data or the model based on which the system was developed may be based on data that may reproduce, perpetuate, exacerbate bias, stereotypes, stigmas, false assumptions about the individuals. Therefore, addressing the discrimination starts at the very beginning of the development of AI system. From the perspective of the Framework Convention, indeed, it introduced the principle of non-discrimination and equality, obliging the states to maintain or adopt measures that would oblige specific actors to embed those benchmarks resulting into equitable and just outcomes. Therefore, the non-discrimination and equality assurance should be embedded throughout the whole life cycle of AI system. But I also would like to touch upon the central mechanism of the Framework Convention, which regards the risk impact assessment. Indeed, the Framework Convention does not prescribe or project or push any specific methodology, but I would like to highlight the Council of Europe's methodology, the Hudaria methodology that was developed by the Intergovernmental Committee on Artificial Intelligence, which, by the way, concluded its work by the end of 2025. But the work with respect to AI will be continued by the new Intergovernmental Steering Committee on New and Emerging Digital Technologies, CDNet. And Hudaria methodology is particularly important, but the risk assessment methodologies are important given the fact that it enables to assess the impacts, the potential adverse impacts on the taking into account the specific context, also engaging the potentially affected people when mitigating or preventing the adverse impacts. So risk assessment and the operational effectiveness of the framework conventions standards is one of the crucial aspects that the states could do on the national level.
Carlien, from EIGE's point of view, what do you think? Are the current approaches to algorithmic fairness capable really of capturing these cumulative and intersectional gender discrimination? I always feel a little bit, again, strange to ask these questions because from my personal experience, again, I can see like even talking about gender discrimination maybe could be sometimes challenging with certain policymakers, but when you add intersectional gender discrimination, it becomes a whole another thing. But what's your experience in this?
Well, you know, I was thinking about this question and then I thought I have to draw a parallel with policy making because, I mean, I have been a policy advisor a while ago, worked for the Dutch government, and policy making is not a goal as such. I mean, you try to design policies that hopefully take into account the reality of citizens in your country. I now speak about a country. And it's not a homogeneous group, so you have to understand the needs of different groups in society, different groups of women, different groups of men. We usually say in our own language, women and men in all their diversity. And we know it's not happening. So I think whether it concerns policy making or the design of systems, it's not a goal as such to design AI systems. They're designed to support the implementation usually of policies, no? So also here, when you design such systems, and I mentioned previously, let's say the women who are most at risk, it means that you have to take this into account when you design these systems. And if you don't, I mean, you might have beautiful, very smart AI systems, and if I hear you speak about the board, I don't know what the goal is of that board, but it's not about smart systems only, it's about fairness, yeah? Systems who take into account the reality. And we know, and I mentioned this before, that women often interrupt their career for care responsibilities. At a later stage, they return in the labor market. It impacts their lives, and if systems do not take this into account, they're automatically discriminated against. And we know from our research that this very clearly shows in hiring and performance management systems. There, women are disadvantaged because these systems don't take into account the realities of women in society. And if I may say so, I can't imagine that systems are being designed by data scientists only. You do need gender equality expertise. You do need involvement of equality bodies, because the average, let's say, designer or citizen, they have no clue. When you speak about gender equality, they have no clue what you're talking about. And I understand, but this expertise lies with equality bodies, with agencies like EIGE. Use our expertise, please use our data, and do this at the start of the designing of these systems, so that you don't need to repair when it's basically too late. And one other thing I would like to say, so don't think that you're there when you fix one bias that you have found. You have to attack the whole package. I leave it to that. Yeah.
Yes, you have to attack the whole whole package. It is that comes to that brings me back to the beginning of my feelings when preparing for this panel. But before moving on with the panel discussion, I see that on my iPad there are no questions from the audience yet. Is that so, or do you know how to add the questions here? Anyway, I encourage you to think also a little bit what could be these pressing questions that you would like to ask from panelists here. If you don't, if you're too shy to ask them out loud, you can do it online. And also I encourage you after our panel discussion and during the reception to find the speakers here and ask them directly.
Maybe it's too digital, Christian. Maybe people are still wanting to raising their hand.
That could be also the option. So I encourage you, of course, let us know if somebody wants to ask directly from the audience. But since there is a question back there immediately, can we get a microphone there, or how does it work? Yep.
Thank you so much for this great and fantastic panel. My name is Jakob Rosin, and I work with accessibility and designing accessible experiences. And I think that there's one question which is really interesting when we talk about AI and fairness and designing policies and standards around this, is how do we define which is fair for somebody, which on some areas is not. I will just give you an example. I'm myself blind, and I use AI a lot to ask it questions about the visual world around me, so what's happening. And it's very happy to do this up to a point. The minute it thinks that there is adult content in sight, it stops and says, you know, I will not tell you this. I'm 31 years old. I, would love to decide it on my own, right? At the same time, I, might want to try this. It's not my story, but it's somebody else's story where they wanted to identify a rash on their child's leg. A blind parent wanted to do this, and the AI refused to do that because it's an adult content, or it's even worse. At the same time, we see that AI, is definitely capable of both describing and creating various contents. Mr. Elon Musk is very much abusing this right now. So my question is, how do we define who has the right to use the AI in some ways, and how not? Thank you.
Well, I think that's very much to the point and €1 million question, but I don't know who feels that they have the most sort of expertise in the area to get to that.
I can very briefly start. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. And as much as I've looked at the research, I think everybody is struggling with this. It is not easy to define fairness in a way that makes sense for everybody in different situations. It becomes a philosophical problem very quickly. And so therefore, when we do develop those AI systems, we have to think through it from the perspective, I think, of what is the intended purpose of a system, what is the context of use, who are the users, and then through specific use cases, we can start to think that how do we ensure that the AI would be robust in scenario A, B, and C, and do precisely what it's supposed to do for the person. So I think through kind of this very kind of a narrow approach to the intended purpose of AI, that can help a bit. But of course, when we have this very broad general purpose AI systems, such as the ChatGPTs and the Geminis, it's very hard to steer as a developer of those systems. Where do you actually, which direction it should be steered? It's also a cultural question also. So in Estonia, you might need one approach, and in some other cultures, a different one.
Mm.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit about how we are making laws. Not just digital laws, but laws in general. We always make laws to keeping in mind the people who are abusing the system, who are breaking the laws. We do not make laws for good people. We make them mostly criminal law, mostly for people who do not understand how to act in a society. And probably this is also one of the examples where AI and digital systems are very, how do I say it, very, they always think how can you abuse this system? And in your case, you're probably not going to abuse it, but the general assumption is that someone is going to abuse it. So I think it's a bit, like we have already been discussing, that these systems have to be perfected in a way that it is more personalized. I think in some years it is probably more personalized, but there is, of course, that question about privacy that always comes to mind. How much privacy are we going to give away to these big corporations? How much are you going to give away? Are you going to accept that if you want to enter a website, you're going to have to show your face? That the AI is going to assume how old you are or something like that. Maybe you have to put your address there. So these are also the questions that come in some point.
Mm-hmm. We have now a question also online that has appeared on my screen. And so from the audience, the question is that we only speak about AI bias. They want to know, is AI bias higher or lower than human bias? Are humans totally unbiased? An advantage of AI is that bias can be evaluated.
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
But if I can say so, AI bias is human bias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I said at the beginning. So if those who program, who work in the ICT sector and basically provide the input on the basis of wrong assumptions, systems don't, it's not the systems, it's the ones who program them. And to give you an example, what we know from our research is that, for example, recruitment systems, we have an example where a company looked for engineers. Yeah? So they designed this beautiful recruitment system, but the ones who programmed them, for them the link with engineer was men. Yeah? So they reached mostly men, and in the let's say the recruitment stage, they were focusing mostly on men. And this is when I said fair, because I used that word in let's say a while ago. This is what I mean. So if the ones who work in that sector work on the basis of wrong assumptions, and very often it's unintentional, it's unconscious bias. It's not the system who discriminates, it's the ones who design the systems. Mm-hmm. But very often unintentional. This unconscious bias I mean, I won't give a lecture here about unconscious bias, but it's so interesting. And I always say, listen, of course I work in gender equality, but I'm also biased. When you say the word doctor to me or surgeon, what I see is a man, not a woman.
Yeah, I think we all carry biases with us, and constantly need to ask ourselves how we see or interpret what's around us, how much that comes from our own personal experience versus sort of wider understanding. But I don't want to be only sort of focusing on very challenging things. So I want to just build up on this recruitment example that you, Carlien, mentioned. AI can be obviously used for many good purposes, including advancing equality. And I'm really proud, and I encourage you to go and check afterwards the screens. In our office, we developed with our developer partners an AI system called Valdur. So this is for us to help make our work more efficient. So basically what it does, it regularly checks the publicly available job vacancy announcements, and it flags us the announcements that are discriminatory. And of course, it brings us lots and lots of work because every week it identifies approximately 100 discriminatory job vacancy announcements. And they can be like based on different characteristics from gender to parental responsibilities, age or nationality, language use, whatever these are. But it really helps us also to be more efficient in our work, because alternative for us had been that, okay, sometimes when we had time, we would go to those public websites and kind of do the manual work, trying to find out these announcements. But now it's much quicker, and it provides us very good statistics as well. There is a question about AI discrimination cases in Estonia. What were they? This opinion, I will reply very quickly on that myself. We have on the website, you can check it afterwards. Right now, this opinion that we had, it's not really established discrimination case. It's more generic, but it does relate to the way that the credit scoring is calculated and automated. So there we found very, very big problems, but I encourage reading this. Now, a question back to the panel here. Would it help to ensure fairness in AI if the AI Act contained a provision on fairness by design, comparable to data protection by design? Maybe that's first, Henrik, to you.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we don't have a requirement of fairness by design already within our kind of legislative framework in our constitution. So the logic of the AI Act is really to create this kind of product safety steps that you do A, B, C, D, and through those you can address different risks that arise, whatever those risks, those harms might be that are already that should not arise based on our existing regulation. So in that sense, I don't know if a rule of AI must be fair by design really adds something that we don't already have. But also I have not thought about that much. So maybe other panelists have some ideas, but that's my initial reaction.
Yeah, I kind of think the same way, because we have lots of laws. We have in our constitution it states clearly that you cannot discriminate against people, and there are many ways how you can discriminate. gender, age, and so on. What the problem is, I think, and what we can do better is educate those who are legislators, like me, myself, how to recognize these problems and how to address them. And as we talked a bit about social media, I think this is also the same case. We have already lots of laws, lots of regulations regarding social media. But does it really work? Does it really work in Europe or in Estonia? All these TikTok videos or Facebook or Instagram and so on. Does it really work? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, and there's health problems and so on. So I think it may be a good idea. I'm not saying completely in a complete confidence, but I think the most important thing now is to work on these frameworks, which we do already have, and we do not do it.
Just to complement really quickly, my perception is that all those standards and benchmarks that are already set by the international frameworks, I think that they already set and prescribe specific standards by design, by default, that should be observed when developing, applying AI systems into practice. And I also want to touch upon and complement what has been already said in respect to the capacity building, which is very much intersected with digital literacy and skills. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was just yesterday, or was it yesterday, day before yesterday, the Safer Internet Day, where I was reading in the news that how the Estonian kids are using AI in their lives. And one of the things that really sort of struck me was that more and more kids see these generative models becoming their friends. Somebody that they speak with. Now, we will watch a very, very short video. And before we do that, I want to leave you with one final sort of question that you can think while we watch the video. And the question is that if you have to think into future, 5 years from now on, in your own professional, but also personal life, how do you see what ways the AI would impact you the most? Maybe you have some very innovative idea how can you make the most professionally or personally from the AI. But let's have a look at the video that should come up any second.
Why is fair artificial intelligence important? Artificial intelligence and automated decision-making systems are increasingly integrated into public services. While they improve efficiency and speed, they can also unintentionally amplify existing inequalities in society. AI systems learn from data that is never completely neutral. Such data reflects past choices and existing injustices. If we fail to recognize these patterns, algorithmic decisions may exclude certain people from services or put them at an unfair disadvantage. In most cases, this is unintentional. However, if we do not ask who is affected by a system, who might remain invisible, and whether the solution works for everyone, even well-intentioned approaches can lead to unfair outcomes. This is why the use of AI must also take into account human rights, equal treatment, and trust. By combining knowledge of rights, technology, and practice, we have developed tools to assess whether automated decisions are transparent, fairly designed, and safe for people. This helps ensure that technology serves society, not the other way around. More information, volinik.ee.
Okay, so as I said earlier, you will see some of these different videos throughout these 2 days. And there is also a campaign going on with the framework of the same project that we have outdoor. You may see some of the posters and screens, little robots called Pico. But before we sort of close the discussion for tonight, so I would like to come then back to your own personal reflections. How can you make the most out of AI?
Okay.
Let's start.
I can start then. That I think for me it's about information processing. So different forms of information processing. The way I mostly use AI already today, but just the ability to get in a very kind of targeted way and very quickly and from very broad resources precisely the information that is being searched for and presented precisely in the kind of format that I need it for. And this really applies for everything in professional capacity as well as in private life, in different decision makings that one does. I think that's a big thing. And of course, then all the agentic AI developments also in terms of actually actioning some of the next steps based on that information. So I think it's a lot of tiny different ways how this development then changes our lives.
I would strongly also agree up to this point. Accessibility of information and shortcuts to specific tailored information and data is one of the benefic opportunities provided by AI, and I would definitely make use out of this opportunity. So serving society rather the way around, like it was said in the video.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the 5 years I will become dumber. And I think I'm not the only one. Because, you know, I myself are a journalist before, a communication expert, and I use AI, for the dumbest things, just to check the things I used to know. I used to know those things. Now I have to check everything. It's almost like the GPS in your car. You know? Beforehand, we used to know where our friend lived. Now we have to put it all every time. I just forget it. Because it's always there in the GPS. And I think this is the real problem for the young ones too. So I'm a bit scared what might happen. Yeah.
Well, for EIGE, for my agency, I mean, we will continue to do research on gender equality and AI. Next year, we have this gender equality index that benchmarks the member states to see how well they do in the area of gender equality. AI is an important topic, and next year in 2027, the specific focus of that gender equality index will be on gender equality and AI, and we will continue to do research because I think that there's still a lot that needs to be done in the area of awareness raising. Personally, or maybe I shouldn't say personally, but what I see more and more in the agency is that AI also helps us to find our information quite quickly. So we usually do surveys, of course we do research, but if you want to do quick scans, for example, AI is a very helpful tool. And there's one thing I would like to say, because, I mean, this little video that you showed, I would say here. I mean, I totally agree with it. And I would like to put one question on the table here is, who does really care what these systems entail and what they bring about? Is it acceptable that they may amplify discrimination? And if I may say so, I see a big role for governments because they deploy these systems. They should take responsibility for the outcomes. And if you're serious in your policy making and the systems they're using, and if you truly want that they treat people equally, you should truly care about what these systems do in society. Truly, I mean, yeah. Let me stop here.
Well, thank you very much for this. From my own perspective, I want to end also with a combination of optimistic and then a little bit echoing also what Andre was saying earlier. So professionally, I see that one ways that we could, that's already in our plans, we develop the AI system on top of Valdo that we have is to help us to monitor these state obligations in conducting gender impact assessments in legislative proposals in different policies. So that would similarly, like the existing model that we have, would flag us where the government hasn't done enough in terms of their obligations. And on a personal note, here's where I am echoing Andre. I should challenge myself, or what I probably will feel challenging is that the AI, for me also, generative AI models tend to become just more than helpers. I use them almost humanizing way. So I have a very good conversation partner in the evenings, and that's, I think, is a challenge in a way, how to maintain my mental well-being in the age of generative AI models. But
I have a small story about my colleague.
Mm-hmm.
When I showed the AI to some elderly people who I was visiting, and I was talking with ChatGPT, and she was talking with me with a feminine voice, and hello, Andre, nice to meet you again. Mm-hmm. It was so friendly, and my colleague said, what are you doing? I have said specifically to my ChatGPT, talk to me like a robot. Not like a human being. You can get in trouble with your wife with that. So, but I still talk to ChatGPT like a person.
Yeah.
I like to say thank you and
Exactly.
please and so on.
But thank you so much. I think it was very, very good opening to our conversations tomorrow. Thank you for listening. And but this evening is not over. So we have a reception outside with a very talented musician playing some music. Please take the time to meet other people, introduce yourselves, and speak with each other. So thank you once again, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.